is Mi'kmaq from the Eel River Bar First Nation. She's the co-founder and CEO of Archipel Research and Consulting. She's an experienced Indigenous liaison and researcher. And she's, have you passed the bar yet, Saber? Any minute now?
No, I still have another year to go.
But she's already been hired by a legal firm. So that tells you, I know, right? And we're also, so we're also going to hear from Albert Dumont. Okay, and Albert is Ottawa's newest and first Indigenous Poet Laureate. And he'll be here for the next, he'll be Poet Laureate for the next 2 years. He's an activist, a poet, an artist. He has been on councils for Well Living House, St. Michael's Hospital. He's been on the Elder Advisory Committee for the Ministry of the Attorney General. He's worked as an elder for the Parole Board and for elder assisted hearings. And he and for his outstanding leadership, he received Dreamkeeper citation. And so I'd like to turn it over to Albert. He's an elder from Kitigan ZB. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Albert, to do our opening, and then perhaps you could lead us off in the discussion.
Okay, Miigwech, you hear me okay?
Yep.
Very good, very good. Yes, my name is Albert Dumont. My grandfather was Samson Commanda, who took the name Dumont, we think maybe around 1920s, and we're not sure about, we suspect he probably took the name Dumont because it was a more Christian sounding name from what we gather. He was very devout Christian. Anyway, I'm an Algonquin from Kitigan ZB near Maniwaki, Quebec. And it's good to be here talking about this very important topic. I'm going to offer words of a prayer in a few minutes because prayer is important to me. You know, whenever we communicate from the physical to the spiritual, we do a great thing that's expected by us from Creator. And whenever the spiritual communicates to the physical, that's even a greater experience. And I know what I'm talking about there because of my bad accident I had years ago, and I'm able to live a life regardless of the severe, excruciating back pain that I live with without medication. So now we're talking about self-ID, and I want to tell you about my family and why self-IDing is something that I'd like. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak on it, because in the 1950s, my family moved away from Kitigan ZB to Pontiac County, and whenever we moved to this small mining town of white people, at least we were the only people that were recognized as Algonquins, fresh off the reserve. And a lot of people came at night, those first few weeks that we were there. Not lots, but it did happen that people came and threw stuff at our house and told us to go back where we came from. So we were confronted with a lot of racism. The people in the town seemed to despise us. They seemed to hate us, even though we didn't do anything to deserve that. As a matter of fact, my parents were sober, hardworking people, and they were Christians. So, and the town was Christian. Anyway, so we endured a lot of racism on the street, in the schoolyard, and in the classroom as well. You know, that was in the 1950s. But in the 1970s, there was something that started in the province of Quebec in Pontiac County that they called it the Indian Alliance. And anybody that came forward and said they had an Indigenous bloodline could apply for subsidized housing, and not brand new houses that they could buy or rent as people of Indigenous bloodlines. And the next thing you know, that some of the most vicious of the racist people who were telling us to get out of the town and go back where we came from were identifying as Indians. They weren't identifying as Algonquins. They weren't identifying as Cree or Ojibwe or anything else. They weren't identifying as Métis. They were identifying as quote unquote Indians. And so that was in the 1970s. So I wondered, of course, I was wondering, how could these people who were once so vicious in their racist attacks against my family today in the 1970s identifying as Indians? Anyway, one of the things I know about being an Algonquin is that my father experienced the pass system. And that meant that he had to go into an Indian agent's office to apply for a pass so that he could leave the reserve to work in a lumber camp, for instance, for 4 months, or apply for a pass so he could go to work as a fishing guide for a few weeks there or a month there, whatever. Imagine that. Imagine experiencing the pass system. And my father never got a right to vote until 1960. So imagine your family being denied the right to vote. Indigenous spiritual beliefs were against the law until 1954, I believe. That's all in my lifetime, these things I'm talking about. I'm 70 years old now, but these things were in my lifetime too. But I was a child, and I never saw the day where I had to go into a white man's office and ask him if I could leave the reserve. But Indigenous spirituality means the world to me. It truly is my salvation. There's people who identify as being Indigenous, but there's no way that they will adopt Indigenous spiritual beliefs. And to me, it's the most beautiful and powerful of all spiritual beliefs. To me, that is a fact of a fact of a fact. So I want to begin this important talk with a prayer. And this is it. This prayer could possibly be thousands of years old. It was passed on from generation to generation to generation in the Twain family at Tamalgami First Nation. And this is it. I want to say to that good spirit in Manado, how grateful we are for everything that Creator placed in our homelands that help human beings to live well. We acknowledge and honor every tree, river, lake, and stream. We acknowledge and honor every bird, animal, fish, and all the good human beings. We're grateful for all those things in the sky world and all those things that live beneath the surface of the earth. We're grateful too for the bees and all the other insects that help the plants to grow. We're grateful for our medicines and for our ceremonies. We're grateful for our ability to prepare ourselves spiritually for that spirit world that will begin when this short physical life ends. We're grateful for our ability to bring peace and comfort to one another during times of troubles and in times of anguish. We ask you now, good spirit, to fill the space that we're in with your blessings and to touch each of us with the wisdom of our Anishnabe ancestors. We ask that there will be good words spoken at this meeting, strong words that will impact all of us emotionally and spiritually. We ask that there's anybody who's listening to this prayer who has a relative or a friend who's suffering somehow, whether from addiction things or depression or some kind of physical sickness we ask that that relative or friend will have a good day today and that they will return soon to the family as a role model and as a mentor. We ask these things of you, good spirit, because of the great respect we have for everything that Creator has made. Miigwech, I know we're going to have a good meeting. I want to say right off the bat that I have absolutely no issues with anyone that identifies as having indigenous bloodline. Who am I to say they have no right to do that? They could do it, and that's how I feel about it. They have a right to do it, and I'm not going to interfere with their right to say that they have indigenous bloodline. What I do have issues with, though, is that I'd like to believe that I'm sensible. And whenever I look at Canada, Canada is a nation. I think everybody would agree with that. So if Canada is a nation, Canada gets to choose who its citizens are going to be. You know, the people apply to become Canadian citizens. Some of them are accepted. Probably most of them are rejected in their application. When it comes to the Algonquin Nation, we want that right as well, to say who is an Algonquin and who is not an Algonquin. Whenever people, like for me, you know, when somebody will say to me, as an example, that they are a chief of a community that I never heard of, and they'll say that they're Algonquin. And I said to a man one time, I said, I want you to show me one document that your community sent to the government to lobby for land rights or for water or for the pollution or for education or whatever. I said, show me one document that your chief and band council put forward before the Algonquin land claim began. That's all I want, is one document. And I said to that guy, I said, you're not even going to be able to show me one document because you didn't exist before the land claim came. You know, whenever we think about the people who lived on reserves, their experience was their experience. And you heard me say about the past system and the denial of the right to vote and those kind of things, those atrocities. I worked in the prison system. You heard Monique say that I did. And when I worked in the prison system, I worked in a maximum security prison, but Quebec wanted me to work in the prison system here in the Laurentians. So they said, come and check out our prison and you will want to work in Quebec. And hopefully, they said. So I went to that prison, and whenever there was a Pathways program. It's called Pathways. And any inmate who gets into that program is pretty much guaranteed early parole. And there's only 10 spots at a time in Pathways to run its session or its course, and then they pick another 10 inmates. But whenever I was there at that prison, 9 of these 10 inmates were self-ID. And meanwhile, the status Indians were at the window looking in at a program that was created for them. You know, our people are a people in recovery. We're still recovering from the Indian Act. We're still recovering from the past system and our denial to vote, and so on and so on and so on. Residential schools and those kinds of things. We're still recovering, and some of our people are dysfunctional. Some of our people have illnesses brought on by bad use of bad drugs, and trauma, past traumas, unresolved grief, and so on, and they get into trouble with the law. But when they're in a prison like that, and there's a program that's made for them to keep them out of prison and to help them, the program, the Pathways program, was pillaged by people who self-identified. They didn't offer no proof. They just said that they were Indigenous, and it's them. However maneuvers they did, they were the ones who were in the Pathways program. The prison, I guess, was okay with them. That's what I don't like about it. I don't like it that jobs are stolen by people who self-identify without any proof. Like what my oldest daughter, Jessica, she had to spend 5 years on welfare after she had her baby, and she was a single mom. It was difficult for her, and for 5 years while she finished her high school, then she went to college and then to university. But for 5 years, she was on welfare, and she calls it her 5 years of hell. But whenever she got a job, though, she was lucky to get a job. What if a self-ID person would have stolen her job from her? Somebody who just checked off that box that said, I'm Indigenous. What about those people who check off that box and get a grant in the arts? You know, some people actually believe that people like Joseph Boyden and Michelle Latimer, that they, if it wasn't for them, there would be no talent, I guess, in Indian country. We just don't have talent. We can't do it. We can't do the arts like those people, like the Joseph Boydens and the Michelle Latimers of this world. I don't like it that we live in a world where people just they're not like those ones who tried to run us out of town in Pontiac County, but they are like the ones who signed up and checked off that box as being Indigenous whenever they saw that there was housing available for them. You know, I don't know what drives people like that, but I'd like to know this. I'd like to know if it bothers them at all that in Algonquin territory, most of the Algonquins north of Kitikan-Zibi live in third world conditions. Most of them, I believe that. And if you don't believe me, take a drive up there someday to those reserves and see for your own eyes. It bothers me as an Algonquin in a resource-rich territory like Algonquin territory is. And these people who are self-identifying, you know, one thing they need to understand is the Algonquins never surrendered our lands. We didn't surrender them to the Europeans. We didn't surrender them to another First Nations. We didn't surrender them to the Métis. We didn't surrender them to the Inuit. We didn't surrender our lands, but yet our land claim is being negotiated by people who have self-identified. You know, these things are happening, and they shouldn't be happening. I want everybody to make clear here. This is a fact of the matter. My brother Kenny has grandchildren, and his grandchildren are not recognized as Algonquins. My grandchildren are. And the only reason why Kenny's grandchildren are not recognized as Algonquins is because him and his wife only got married about 20 years after they start living together. If they would have got married before 1985, their grandchildren would be recognized as Algonquins too. But right now, the government of Canada is not recognizing my brother's grandchildren as Algonquins, but they are recognizing members of the Algonquins of Ontario as Algonquins, even though that organization threw out over 2,000 of their members a couple of years ago. So I don't get it. I don't get it how racist it is. I really believe that those people who self-identify just for the purpose of stealing, like I said earlier, I don't care who self-identifies. I don't have an issue with that, but I do have an issue with people who self-identify for benefit. To steal a program in the prison system that was created for other people, to steal grant money, to steal voting rights, to steal jobs. They do it. And it's true. Nobody could deny that. Anybody that denies that doesn't know what you're talking about. Anyway, we need to, I've got so much more to say about this. I could talk for hours about it. But there's other panels, and that's what I'll say for now. Miigwech. By the way, I want everybody to know that I'm at peace, and I wish everyone well. You know, just as an activist, though, I don't like it when people steal from the Algonquins or from any Indigenous peoples. And that's a fact. It's just a fact of activism, right? We stand up and we say, stop the stealing. So, miigwech.
Miigwech, Albert. Always. Thank you so much. Your words are always impactful. And I appreciate that. Everyone here appreciates that. And now I'd like to turn it over to Tamara. And
thank you. Miigwech, all my relations. My name is Tamara Bell. I'm Haida from Haida Gwaii, the west coast of British Columbia. And I have worked, as you mentioned earlier, in this industry forever, but we won't say the age because we don't want to give our age away. So we've been in this industry for a very, very long time. And I want to dive right into the issues. I want to first apologize to those that I'm Haida, my tribe is matriarchal. And I'm very frank in terms of discussions about this particular issue, actually all issues. My clan is Raven Clan. My grandfather was Chinny Joe, and my grandmother was Nani Carey. We come from Old Masset Village. My mother was Mona Weir, and she is the daughter of a hereditary chief and a healer. I very much believe in traditionalism like Albert does. I'm a sun dancer. And I also participate in the Native American Church in the States. And I'm very connected in the grassroots, you know, I like it. But when we're talking about issues, what happened recently is that I introduced something called the Indigenous Identity Act, which would mean that people who were pretending to be Indigenous would then receive a 5-year prison term or a fine. And I viewed the entire act of pretending or assuming Indigenous identity as a criminal act. I'm not brilliant, but what happened is that there is a particular act that exists in the States, and it's called the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. And that act has been in place for over 100 years. And what it did was it protects the art and culture from non-Native people usurping most of the money. And so that act has been in place, people have been prosecuted, and that act that has existed in the United States, I thought would be fabulous to have in Canada so that we could then create consequences. Because as we sit now in the orbit within Canada, we have a myriad of identity issues, and some of the issues, as Albert was eloquently discussing earlier, are very difficult to pinpoint. Yet, however, as difficult as they are, there's actually a series of definitions and ideologies that make it so much simpler. So what happened after that was is that I actually began talking to a senator, and we're working on drafting legislation for the Canadian government to institutionalize and adopt this particular legislation. The reason for doing it is that Canadians in general don't get it, and they don't get Indigenous identity, and they don't get Indigenous people. We have moved so far, our culture, to meet them part way, and they haven't taken steps towards us. So until Canadians begin to take steps towards us to understand our identity, who we are, our history, what matters to us, our worldview is we put Indigenous people in our community before ourselves. When you look at Pretendians, they put themselves before everybody. So step number one is that their worldview is completely different. I believe that we work like what happens to my community happens to me. And that's why we feel it differently. What happens to a Canadian happens to a Canadian. And we don't feel the same as we do because the connection and the worldview is a very different worldview. When we're talking about the Pretendian, I want to just quickly explore what the Pretendian is and what it does. I undoubtedly 100% know that every Pretendian does it for financial reasons, for financial gain. Pretendians have a playbook that they follow in order to assume Indigenous identity. They assume Indigenous identity without having any requisite information like a regular Canadian or a regular American. When they get found out, they double down. They then go to the very community and start seeking out elders and harassing them, coercing them, and getting them to back them. So not only, it's like committing a crime and then going to the people you commit a crime with and then saying, hey, I ripped off your entire house and I stole some of your most precious stuff, but can you vouch for me in court? So let's enter the mind of a Pretendian in some ways. There's a desperate, almost clumsy way to create an illusion of inclusion where they sidle up to Native people and become friends with us, which means we somehow let them in, even though we know that they're not really Native. We all talk about it. But anyways, the illusion of inclusion is still there. And then what happens after that is that they assume the identity without recourse or understanding. And the friends they make know they're not Native, and they don't really integrate into the community or have any interest in helping. With Pretendians and people who assume Indigenous identity, they are certainly there for the profits. They are certainly there for any limelight. They're certainly there for fame and fortune. But you don't see them in our marches or protests. You don't see them in the trenches. You don't see them when the real work is being done in our communities. So we know what their intent is. Is this criminal behavior? I believe it is. Because what you're doing is you're stealing an identity from the poorest demographic in the Americas. Now, I want people to understand that when you're stealing something from people that are already struggling economically, how evil that actually is. It is criminal behavior. It is absolutely, and a lot of people think I've gone too far. I actually think I haven't gone far enough. I'm very tempered in the way I believe, and I research and I analyze. I'm not off the cuff. I believe I'm very tempered. But you have to remember, and people were very, very upset when I proposed the Indigenous Identity Act. I received a number of death threats, and people were incredibly angry. And not the women. It was a lot of guys who were really angry at me in regards to making the announcement. And I did it with a series of 6 elders. I did it with my sister and my son. And I didn't do it to upset people. I did it because we're creating a social boundary. Just like the N-word used in America. What happened is that it was claimed by the Black community, and it created a social boundary and a big social movement saying, you're not allowed to use that word anymore. And there was a lot of pushback. But what happens is that when you create a social boundary, you gain more leverage, respect. You say, hold on a minute here, we're kind of done putting up with a lot of stuff. And this is one of the things we don't want to put up with anymore. And you're not allowed to use that word just simply because I'm saying it offends me. So the law that I'm proposing is a social boundary saying, we're kind of tired of this. We're tired of being pushed around. We're tired of you exploiting every aspect of our culture, our people, our land, our resources, our children, everything. And our identity, the reason why I believe it's a flashpoint for people and it's so incredibly personal for our people is that you have our people who have spent 500 years and to this very day in active genocide, where our women are being killed, our children are killing ourselves, seniors are being exploited, our resources are being raped from the earth. And you've got all of this massive theft, and you've got our traditional people with no seeming benefit or reason for being traditional and upholding these ceremonies and traditions and everything that we hold so sacred. You have all of that, and they've maintained those over hundreds of years, and our identity has been under assault for 500 years. And all of a sudden somebody comes along and says, you know what? I'm dating somebody native, so I'm suddenly native. No, it doesn't work that way. It's offensive. It's egregious. And I believe that when you look at the mentality of a pretendian, it's criminal behavior, it's narcissistic, it fabricates Indigenous identity in ways, it's predatory, because you have to remember there's an exploitive factor. When you're being exploited, there's a predator, so it's predatory behavior. And in the end, our people suffer economically because of a loss of income and jobs.
Thank you. Kachimigwich, Tamara, you make some very valid points. It's so true. It's about more than it's about more than, and it's about more than just jobs. It's about our identity, and that whole MO you told us about. I've seen that. I've absolutely seen that. And I'd like to now turn to Saber Pictuli to talk to us a little bit about her perspective.
Thank you. Kwe Daluisi Saber Pictuli Aktalewe Upganjik. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon to some. My name is Saber Pictuli, and I'm Mi'kmaq from Eel River Bar First Nation in northern New Brunswick. I come to you today with a little bit of a diverse background. I have an undergrad in Indigenous art history with First People Studies from Concordia in Montreal. And I have a master's in Indigenous and Canadian Studies, where I specialized in Aboriginal legal traditions. And I'm just finishing my Juris Doctor of Law here in Halifax. And I actually specialize in writing band membership codes. And I'm the CEO and co-founder of Our Chappelle Research and Consulting, which I have the pleasure of working alongside Monique and Albert, and have been honored with their presence many times over, and looking forward to doing continued work. I work quite a bit in and around the concepts of institutional accountability and Indigenous identity and community belonging and membership. And it's very, very nuanced and fluid and complex. And I have to echo the majority of points from both Tamara and Albert. Thank you so much for joining and sharing both your words and stories and perspectives, and it's so valued. And we're at a tipping point. And I come here with my personal perspective. And I say a tipping point because there have been some traumas happening in community from Pretendians. And we're also in a stage of very strong reclamation as the Indigenous community in the Americas. Now, that nuance is a huge strength, having the ability to reclaim and move forward in resurgence the way we're doing in the grassroots movements, in the arts and cultures, in the community efforts. It's beautiful and astounding, but has also brought to the surface level a lot of problems, including this issue of Pretendian, which causes an extreme amount of harm, and harm that's already been resonating through issues of residential schools, through issues of cultural appropriation, and you know, the list can go on and on. And so I'm really here to talk about what does institutional accountability look like, and what could that mean? And that's a very complicated question, because we're asking a question towards institutions that are not Indigenous, towards colonial institutions, colonial governments, things that are not natural to our worldviews and the way that we engage in life. And how do we bridge that, really? And how do we bridge that? Our people that are on identity journeys as a result from, oh, my internet cut out there. You guys can hear me? There's a huge thunderstorm happening here in Halifax right now. So it's, of course, the tensions of the Pretendians, and there's thunder and lightning happening. It's like a real theatrics over here. It's great. But I was saying that it's a very difficult endeavor right now, and we don't want to harm the Indigenous people, the people who are part of our community who are on an identity journey also right now. And that is part of reclamation. But there's a very fine line between what we need to ask of the institutions, and what we need to ask of the institutions is to ensure that they are supporting the authentic voice. But that becomes the issue of what is an authentic voice. And from my personal perspective, and I come here very humbled, the authentic voice relies on relational responsibility and relational accountability, which we've heard from both Albert and Tamara. And that's really in terms of elevating community and being accountable to community. And there's many ways to come to that, but it is, regardless of where you're starting in your journey, if you're an Indigenous person that has been segregated from your community and culture through the initiatives of the colonial governments and you know, since 1492, and you're just entering that journey, that doesn't entitle you to the space that has been fought for and allocated for Indigenous people. And I think we're all here to say, if you're just entering in that journey, we're not here to say you're not Indigenous, and we're not here to negate you, but the space that's been set aside for Indigenous people need to be prioritized for the people who have done that work, who have experienced community oppression and community struggles, and have their roots. Now, that's not to say if you're just entering into that journey, you can't get there. You can very much so get there if you have that spirit that we talk about. And I see that in a lot of the work that I do when I write band membership codes, when I facilitate focus groups across the nation. I see that the Indigenous perspective is interwoven with the community, but also interwoven with the belief of truth, which is very, very different from this mentality, this colonizing mentality. I see with community members that there is an inability to digest lies, and lies is an extremely detrimental disvalue to our people. And if you can digest a lie and move forward with an identity that you don't have roots in, this is the sole issue right here, right? And that's where the worldviews in themselves are extraordinarily different. And that has to be a line. There has to be a line drawn. And unfortunately, we're right now still in a place where the colonial government, like Albert was saying, has taken away our ability to self-govern. And I'm not here today, no one's here today saying how communities should identify their membership codes, or we're not here to label who belongs, but the colonial government has stripped that away from us. And now we're in this space where we're tasking institutions in almost an answer to that. And that's not the appropriate way either. I know we do reference what's going on in the United States, and that's fantastic, but we also have to look at the roots of the United States. And their tribes have a lot more control over their membership rulings. And here in Canada, we're very limited in who and how we can claim membership. And we're just starting that journey towards really self-governing for membership and community belonging. So it's a very tricky place to be, to try to task an institution with accountability to determine the authentic voice when we've been stripped of that, and we're still working towards that. So it is a conversation that we need to have in plentyfold, and it needs to continue, and we need to be amplifying community voices to hold institutions accountable. That's really what I wanted to share, moving into hopefully a little bit of a wholesome and fulsome discussion on this topic. I'm not here to prescribe anything. There does need to be a line drawn, absolutely. And I am a firm believer in relational accountability, and that needs to be the basis of moving forward for institutional accountability. Thanks, Monique.
Good, Saber. I think what I'm hearing from everyone is this idea of, people who have Indigenous ancestry versus as opposed to people who are active, acknowledged members of community. We all know that there have been policies in place to remove our members from community. The misogyny of the Indian Act, the 60s scoop, the residential school, enfranchisement. All these mechanisms were put in place to remove us from our community and as active tools of genocide. So now, when we're looking at, how do we begin? Because it's true, for many years, I think it's only been in the last 10 years, my own community has had an actual membership person in the band office. Because prior to that, you applied directly to Indian Affairs, and they decided whether or not you were a member of the community. So it's not something that, this is something that's new to my community anyway. And I'm going to go, there's been a couple of questions in the Q&A, and this one sort of stands out for me. It's from Carol Dumont, but the question is, she says there needs to be a fair process in place to deal with the issue, led by people from across the land and all nations. And do you think that there's such a process being developed? And I mean, that would have to be, I think, a community-based, that's a many-pronged approach. But what, I'll just put it out there to you guys. What have you seen from community response to this?
Well, I know in my community, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay. I know in my community, there are people who are just, saying they're hide and they're not. But I mean, the thing is, one of the things is that we're working on defining these nuances within ourselves, the recovery of colonization, the recovery in difficulty, and trying to get Canada to stop active genocide, try to get them to acknowledge that genocide is happening and we're living in genocide. And although there's a lot of Canadians who believe in reconciliation, it's high time that people stop being silent and start actually dealing with the facts that genocide is happening, and that a part of the genocide is the activity of the Pretendian. There are always the nuances of people who we're not 100% sure, but I mean, part of the things for for all institutions that want to employ Indigenous people, one of the most important things that I really believe that needs to happen is that they need to take a program. They have to learn the basics on Native people, because right now they don't know almost nothing. So you can have a large organization being run, and you have people who are working in a Native organization or in a large government institution or anywhere in Canada, and they really don't have any knowledge of Indigenous culture whatsoever. So even the most basic things like residential school, they don't understand. They're like, what? There was a residential school? What happened? And then you have to explain everything. So we're talking that, that these large government organizations and people who truly do want reconciliation to happen, which is reconciliation is actually reconciliation. And until those companies and those organizations get a foothold in a little tiny bit of understanding about Indigenous culture, we'll never be able to get any kind of equality, representation, respect. We can't weed out Pretendians because we don't even freaking have a voice. And until those companies recognize that they have to meet us part way, we're never going to get anywhere. And so that means that they have to come to the table to us, and they have to learn, and they have to pick up books on and begin to understand and communicate and consult with Indigenous communities. There's a number of institutions in Canada right now, in Vancouver, that are struggling with Pretendians taking positions that they don't have. And I'm working actively with those organizations to say, you can't, so there's one person in particular who's discovered to be a Pretendian. And then when pressed, she really wasn't Native. And then she came out and said, I'm not really Native. And then they decided to keep her anyways. So you have corporations, schools like SFU, who will hire a Pretendian. And even when they're found out and they're lying, even though it causes tremendous pain to Indigenous people, it obviously through their actions, they don't care. So, there's many, many different layers to this. And I know that there's a lot of nuances within the community, but I used to have a store, and we had people coming to the store all the time. And there were people who were aging out of foster care, and they would come to me and say, I don't really know anything tomorrow. What should I do? And I talked to them, and I'd say, well, tell me about your life. Tell me about what happened. And, and I would help them. I would help them kind of find their way. And I would reach out to them because I recognize that that's a part of the colonial, genocidal agenda from Canada. Now, but when I met somebody who pretended to be Native, I could tell right away, because I'd be like, hey, blah, 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 we'd be talking. And so there's multiple things. I think we can go inward and we can look at ourselves as we begin to do this. But I think we also have to look outward and put the responsibility on these corporations and these large organizations and the government to begin to understand that if you're going to hire Pretendians, you have to have a system in place. If you have a Native organization and you're hiring non-Native people, there must be some kind of program in place for you to understand the basics. A 2-day workshop, for God's sakes, on Indigenous people. Anything is helpful. So I think they have to meet us part way. And that's the responsibility of the Canadian government, all these organizations. If they truly want diversity, reconciliation, and they want to end the genocidal policies, they have to meet us part way.
Thanks. Albert, I'm going to ask you what you think.
Yeah, just that I concur with what was already said on that question. I know that it's hard to trust in anything that might, there's nothing there right now. And because there's no trust, and there needs to be trust. And I just don't see it much around me when it comes to identity and what should be worked out to remedy the situation as it is, because there definitely is thefts that are occurring by shameless, criminal-minded people. I don't know what their spiritual beliefs are, if they have any, but I guess they don't understand that there will be an accounting someday, because people, if somebody, let's say somebody really has, let's say 1 or 2% Indigenous blood in their system, does that mean that they deny the 99 or 98% European bloodline they have? Are they renouncing it? Are they ashamed of it? Are they, whenever they apply for a grant as Indigenous, do they say that? Or a grant as an Indigenous artist one day and then go back the next day and apply for another grant as a white person? Because I'm an artist and I've applied many times for grants, and guess how many grants I got? If you said 0, you were right. I never got one grant from the mainstream arts councils. I did get a grant from the city of Ottawa, which I'm grateful for, but it had really didn't have anything to do with the arts. But as far as artists go, and you know, it's just not right that an authentic voice falls silent while a self-ID voice is heard, and we are going to disappear if we don't fight back. We're not going to be around much longer, because we might be physically present, but we won't have no voice. The only people that are going to be heard is people who self-identify, and that's going to be a bad day for our future generations. And I, for one, will not go down without a fight. I just wanted to say that for now. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Albert. What do you think, Saber?
There we go. I found the mute button. Well, I think the root of the question was about developing the FAIR process. Was that the original question?
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything there, Melanie?
Well, there was somebody, Stephen Bartlett has asked also, can a community establish its own local civil or criminal code at the local level and enforce it, and not have to go to the bigger colonial systems? This way, set a boundary and take the power back or take it away from these colonial.
I think that's so brilliant and wonderful. When you look at, like, I'll give you an example of how Pretendians are single-minded and materialistic and capitalistic. My friend went to Harvard, and he's a Choctaw Apache native dude. And he got accepted into Harvard, and everybody has like these groups that you can get together with, and they support you, and it's like there to help you. And so he started this group, and he wanted to have an Indigenous group because there was an Asian group, there was a Black group, but there was no Indigenous group. So he was able to gather all the names of everybody who checked the box. And 75% of the people who had enrolled as Indigenous were not Indigenous. Now, you're talking about high-paying jobs, eventually, high-paying careers, eventually. Now, these are people who are extorting and manipulating and taking advantage of the situation and methodically taking our issue of sorting out our identity. And this predatory behavior is being used to benefit themselves. So when you look at the Indigenous community, struggling in poverty, struggling with all the social issues, we have so many things to deal with in the community. I want us to look at like the actions of a Pretendian and understand that they don't give anything back. You know, Michelle Latimer could have easily, she made millions and millions of dollars. I calculated her income. I'm assuming that it's around the $4 million mark for her 2 projects. That is more than I've made in my entire career. I almost never get called for work, just like a lot of other people, because Native people don't get called because there's no institutional system inside or set in place. And I'll give you an example is that, do you think that now that CBC, Telefilm, and CMF and all of these organizations, they've been through this with NFB, all this rigmarole, this massive egg on their face. This is the first time that they actually have a reason to hire really Native people. They've never had that reason before. You know, there's been studies done where white people actually prefer Pretendians. So, I mean, it's very difficult for us to make any headway if the greater colonial system really doesn't want to have to adopt any of our process or procedures inward. If you bring up anything in an institution, you get called a troublemaker.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a woman and you bring anything up in an institution, you're a troublemaker. So who ends up getting penalized when you step forward and say, look, I have an issue with the Pretendian. She's sitting here telling me all about her European roots, and I don't even think she's Native. And if you ask her and you're like, hey, you say you're Blackfoot, but you don't know anything about your culture. You don't even know the village you come from. You don't know anything. And you're sitting here telling me all day long about your French culture. I don't really think you're Blackfoot. And then you bring it up. You're the one who gets blackballed. You're the one who gets kicked out because you're, as an Indigenous person, they decapitate your voice. So your voice is no longer relevant. So this is another institutional thing that has to change. I mean, Canadians and institutions have to take it seriously. But one of the things that I think that makes it really, really important that we stand up and fight is that I don't know if you've ever received advice, we all have, from somebody you don't respect. So you're going, yeah, I'm having all these problems. And they're like giving you this crazy thing. And you're like, that's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. You don't respect them because their life is a disaster and you're trying to get life advice. You accidentally ask life advice. The reason why Canadians don't listen to Aboriginal people is because they don't respect Aboriginal people. They won't take our advice. They won't take our policies. They won't take our recommendations. And they won't lean into us even a little bit to help. So I think while we're seeking identity issues and we're looking inward, I think we also have to look outward and say, hey, well, hold on a minute here. All of you people who want to exploit every dollar, every cent, every piece of identity, every piece of blood, and you want to take everything we have, including our most precious thing, our identity, and you want all of that, hold on a minute here. You have to go inward as well and figure out internally how you're going to serve the best interest of reconciliation in Canadians, because we deserve the same dream as Canada provides everybody else, which is we shouldn't be living in poverty. We shouldn't have boiled water advisories. These are things that are should not be happening in Canada, and we shouldn't accept it either. We deserve to be treated with humanity. We're human beings. When you steal a job from us, you're stealing food out of me and my son's mouth. When you're stealing a job from Sabre or from Albert and you're taking money from him, you're taking it directly from a Native person and you're contributing to our poverty. And add it together, put the dots together and recognize that they are a huge problem. And so I think, you know, people ask me all the time, I get tons of emails, how do we call out a Pretendian? Well, there's a ton of ways to call out a Pretendian. As soon as you get a sense that something's going on, I mean, there's always a consequence. The consequence is that you won't be listened to because of the genocidal climate that we live in. But I mean, if we fight this battle now, 7 generations from now, our Indigenous people will have opportunities. But if we do nothing and we remain silent and we are complicit in this, then even at Harvard, 75% of those big Harvard opportunities will not go to our people. And you're talking about big grants, big dollars. These Pretendians, they're not taking jobs that are like cashiers. They're taking high-level positions. They don't want the low jobs. They want the high-level positions and they want the fame. Mm-hmm. So those are huge dollar opportunities for us that we need to address because they should not go. If you go to Germany or any other country and if you come to Canada, we all have rights and Canada will police you and incarcerate you and say, hey, you're from like Germany and you're working here and you don't have a visa. That's a problem. So we should have the same policy for us as Native people. We shouldn't allow it. We should be able to police this and say, hold on a minute here. You shouldn't be taking this job. It's completely 100% inappropriate. You know, it's egregious. So I don't know. I mean, I have I have very strong opinions about this because I believe as our people, you know, we've got one chance, and we're at a really critical point with a couple of situations that have caused a great deal of pain in our community. And the only way to heal pain is to also seek justice.
Miigwech, thank you. Saber, because I know you're studying law, there's two things. The idea of establishing a local or civil criminal code. And also there's another question from Marnie Usamatu. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm so sorry. I hate it when people mess up my name. It says, they say it is currently common practice among employers to accept self-declarations. How can employers look beyond self-declarations to verify Indigenous identity? And we've seen that all the time. All they have to do is say, yep, I'm Indigenous. And it doesn't matter if they have an Indigenous ancestor from, 5 or 6 generations back.
Mm-hmm.
Then, obviously that's.
So yeah, let me work through some of this. I've been watching the questions pop up. So thank you, everyone. Firstly, I think it's important to just situate a little bit of the history of what went on. So originally, self-ID was not always the avenue. And originally it was a really narrow scope for status cards or Métis cards or Inuit cards. And out of a grassroots movement, we really worked to reject that because it negated and discriminated against a huge portion of our population who doesn't have, access to that. And so, of course, the Colonial Institute, without consultation, what would be the best way to improve on that, just flipped the script to the total opposite direction. And then it became the checkbox, right? The self-ID box that's led us down to the road that now we're here, right? So that's a little bit of how we got here. Now, to address the civil code issue, it's common practice for communities to enact bylaws, and you can have community-specific bylaws. We see that all the time, like dry communities who bylaw no alcohol in communities. They bylaw, a cannabis ban. They bylaw, language legislation and other things. So there is an avenue there, but then there's limitations, like would it be limited to people who are living on reserve, who are falling under the category of Pretendian, or a real issue can be people who are non-Indigenous marrying into community, moving into community and appropriating the culture and then benefiting from it. And that would be an avenue that a bylaw might be best pursued for a community perspective. And then I saw some questions about really, are there initiatives to change this? What is really happening? And I can speak from the work that I'm doing, and alongside with Monique, we're working with quite a few big mainstream funding bodies that fund Indigenous artists. And we're working to develop eligibility qualifications. So again, it's not about identity issues, but rather about how can we write a policy that would embody what we're talking about here, right? And it's just not simple for employers. It's not, you can't just check a box or submit one form. It's really about having committees and having narratives and understanding those connections to avoid this Pretendian issue. And these issues that have been transpiring, like the Michelle Latimer issue, are kind of lighting a fire to really roll this out as efficiently as possible, which does not mean quickly, right? The issue is we get in hot water with the federal government because they'll flip the switch and go, okay, well, this is a problem, so we're just gonna put out a solution. And that's not the best way to correct error, right? It needs to be a slow process. And I'm a part of some work today that we're working on policy writing for funding eligibility, and it will take months of community conversation and months of hearing, perspectives and literature reviews and trying to make sure we're doing justice to ensure that we're not discriminating against our own people, but we are ensuring that there are clear lines and making sure that we're funding the right people and avoiding, I don't like the term, it's an aggressive term, Pretendian. It's a needed term, and it should make you feel uncomfortable. And I've seen a couple of comments in there about it. And it is being utilized and it's being weaponized right now. And that's coming from a place of deep harm and deep pain. And it needs to be acknowledged and needs to be sat with. And we need to work through this process and not trigger finger anything, right? And that's how we've gotten to the self-ID box. We came to it because the federal government pulled a trigger on initiative and then opened the floodgates. And it did exactly what Tamara said. It discriminates against Indigenous people because Indigenous people don't fit into these white colonial boxes. We fall through the boxes and we are different, and that needs to be honored. And I can tell you right now in my work, we're working to honor these differences and ensure that that's represented in the policy moving forward with some big governing bodies. And hopefully that means things will be at least improved over the next year or two when it comes to the funding eligibility. And I know Tamara is working very hard when it comes to the legislative side of things. So this is, this conversation is one of the, key coals to the fire to get everything going in the right direction.
Thank you. That makes, that and doing that on both sides. I have a question here from Michelle Penny. Hey, Michelle. Shout out. Wonderful lady. When you know information about someone who's a Pretendian, who do you tell?
It depends on what organization and where they are, what they're doing, because it's not just that easy. I'm working with 2 institutions right now who've identified a Pretendian and are removing them from that job and placing them in another position because they can't get rid of them. One of the things that was that's being done right now, and I know some of the institutions I work with, if you, and I know if you sign a contract basically saying, yes, I can prove that I'm Indigenous, and a temporary contract is one way in lieu of saying, you must be able to validate, if called upon, that you actually are Indigenous, because we're an institution, we don't really know the policies or rules or whatever. But if you're going to check the box, would you be willing to sign a contract that, should you be called upon, especially if it's in a high position, like say, for example, an Indigenous dean, and you happen to be non-Indigenous, that's a key role inside a university institution. And having a contract in place does provide a little bit of peace for the institution, and does hold the person accountable for being able to identify and provide proof that they are actually Aboriginal.
So where's the line?
Could I say something too?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was about close to 30 years ago that I went to a sunrise ceremony, and there was about 70 people that were at that sunrise ceremony. I was on the Breton Flats, and half of them were white people. And I was really impressed with that. And my elder was, one of my elders was Bobby Woods. And I mentioned it to Bobby a few days later, and I bumped into him, and I said, "Hey, Bobby, I was at a sunrise ceremony, and about 70 people, and close to 35 of them were white people." I said I was so impressed by that. And Bobby shook his head and he said, "Let me tell you something." He said, "The white man will never be satisfied with just taking his place in our circle. The white man is only going to be happy when he's running our circles." He said, "You just watch and see." So that was in like I say, that was a long time ago. And it's true. The people are taking over, and for the most part, it's because we're allowing it to happen. I know that for me, I've been around the community since when my sobriety began in 1988, and I got heavily involved with my community at the time. I think for a while there, I was the biggest volunteer they ever had at the Odawa Friendship Center. I was involved with everything that was going on there, it seemed to me, at those days. And I remember people were saying to me how much they wished that they were had some Indigenous blood in them. But And that was then. And today they're claiming to be Mi'kmaq, or they're claiming to be Algonquins or Mohawks. And I guess they're forgetting that they told me a long time ago that they were not Indigenous, but now all of a sudden they are. And if the question is, who do you tell? Well, I just tell people, you know, what I know. I'll just say so and so 25 years ago was saying that he wished he had Indigenous blood in him. And now he's saying he's Mi'kmaq, so figure that one out. Anyway, I know that when I worked with the parole board, and how many people came before the parole board to say that they found out in the prison system that they were Cree or they were Ojibwe or whatever, and then they joined the Native Brotherhood or start thinking in the programs for Indigenous people, and then there they were before the parole board, coming before the parole board as Indigenous inmates. And because I know, and the fact that nobody finds out while they're in prison. Imagine being in prison and somehow you discover that you're Cree. Like, I mean, come on now. Anyways, I was there as an advisor at the parole board hearings, and whenever it was truly Indigenous people that were applying for parole, I did everything I could to see to it that they got parole. But for these people who are abusing and stealing the identity of an inmate by claiming to be Ojibwe or whatever, I would say during the deliberations, I'd say that guy is not Indigenous, and I just want you to know that. And they'd say, I know, we know, we questioned him, we know he's not, but we have to accept him as Indigenous though, and that's the way it's going. Everywhere you turn around, there's people that are stealing programs, stealing from us, and I like it what was said about they're contributing to the poverty. They're contributing to the stuff that people are suffering. People really are in recovery mode. Like we are people that are still healing from the oppression of the Indian Act and of Canadian people in general. And for these people that self-identify to pillage our programs and stuff, or grants and what have you, they've got no conscience. They don't care. I don't know. Again, I'll say whatever. I don't know what their spiritual beliefs are, but I guess they don't have any, because they obviously don't care about telling their lies. I just want to say that and miigwech.
Miigwech, Albert.
Thanks.
And I'm wondering. I mean, we've all run into these people who have maybe some Indigenous ancestor, like Michelle Latimer. They're saying she has an Indigenous ancestor, but where is for me, it's connection to community, and not necessarily an urban community, because urban communities are made up of so many different nations. And when you talk about, oh well, I'm Algonquin or I'm Métis, and you don't have connection to that community, then to me that tells me that they're, maybe they are just looking for the fame of it. People want to be different, they want to be special, and somehow, even though obviously they haven't lived lives that Indigenous community members have. They've lived lives of privilege, and so it's a way of them, being this sort of special person without having to deal with all of the negativity and the trauma and everything that goes along with that. So I was asking, this is something just before Albert was speaking. Where is that line? I mean, what's the difference between having Indigenous ancestry, which is fine, power to you, way to go, or being an active and acknowledged member of community? Where's the line?
Well, can I just quickly add something to something that Albert said?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what I want to say is that not only do Pretendians contribute to poverty, they're also contribute to the mistrust we have in Canada, which is already an exorbitant amount of mistrust. When you look at our treaties, you look at the history, you look at the natural resource law, you look at the theft of our children, there's already a great deal of mistrust. So Pretendians hurt reconciliation because Canada, there's a lot of Canadians who truly want reconciliation, which I think is called reconciliation, where there has to be action behind it. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. So I think there are some truly good Canadians who really do want to achieve reconciliation, but people like Michelle Latimer and Joseph Boyden hamper that by the continued theft. And so that is a problem because we all feel that tremendous amount of pain. And when an institution hires a Pretendian, they're hiring a person who has none of the trauma, bear the scars, or any of that. And so, and they recognize to hire somebody Native means that you have to get a little uncomfortable and learn something about Indigenous people. You have to hire somebody that's a little unfamiliar with you and your culture. So that's a very important part of the hiring process, is that if you want reconciliation and you want diversity, you have to get a little uncomfortable and you have to be able to ask the proper questions and be able to integrate into their understanding. So I have friends who are Black, I have friends from all over the world, and I really want to know about their culture. So I spend a lot of time studying, like when I went to Italy, I spent all this time studying about going to Italy before I went to it. But you can have Canadians who have something to do with Native people, and there's zero studying, zero interest. That has to end. Because, I find myself, doing a lot of like work and it's very difficult. But I think, so when we go back to the Pretendians, it's not only hampering reconciliation, it contributes to poverty, but we all think, there's a mastermind, there's a masterminding behind it. There's a criminal intelligence about being able to do that. I don't know, living a false life. What it is, it starts out as a lie. So I don't want to say, somebody said to me, you're villainizing these people. Well, they've been criminalizing Indigenous people since contact. And let's call a spade a spade. You lie, you're extorting money, you're manufacturing like a lineage, you're, doing this for profit, making millions and millions and millions of dollars. And we no longer trust you, and you're, fabricated like Wonderland. So I think, I think we have to look at it in a somewhat of a different way, where we look at the person who does it. Because right now in Canada, if you look at like the conversation on social media, there's the Canadians going, leave them alone. And then there's Native people saying, this has got to end. So there's obviously a massive divide in social perception around this particular issue. And I think that when you look at this issue, the thing is that with white people and the criminal justice system, Native people have always gotten, the worst rap in the criminal justice system. When you look at like white people, they get a slap on the wrist and they get the benefit of the doubt. So I think that has to end. We've got to shine a little bit of a light on that you don't get the benefit of the doubt this time. We need evidence. You need to come to the table and bring us evidence. You need to show us that you are exactly what you say you are. And the onus must be on them and their responsibility, because we do have process in place. We also have a process of grievances, resolving grievances in our traditional community. So if she really wanted to reconcile some of the differences, or if any of them do, there's a traditional process in place for us to handle grievances. And, you know, suing everybody isn't a way of doing it. And so I think there's a lot of damage being caused. I think it re-traumatizes our Indigenous community when people are doing this. It contributes to a trigger point that we have where trauma stacks upon itself. And we need a respite from this kind of trauma. And Canadians have to engage with us to stop doing things like this.
Yeah. Monique, can I ask permission to share my story, my community?
Please.
Sure, yeah.
I know this is going to take us over time, so my apologies to everyone, but I'm seeing a lot of questions about, you know, identifying as Indigenous without really that connection to community. And I'm going to bring this real personal from my perspective for everyone here. But I didn't grow up in community. I'm a daughter of a residential school and 60 scoop survivor who was taken when she was 3 years old from my community in New Brunswick and taken from New Brunswick into the Mississaugas next to Toronto and sent to residential school there. And the nuns told her that her whole family were dead. And then she was adopted by a non-Indigenous family who then died. Both of them passed away when my mom was, I think, 14 years old, and she ended up on the streets of Toronto. And then she got picked up by a gang and then did a significant period of time in the penitentiary. So she went to jail for many years. And then she had me at 38. So I'm 29. And so when she had me at 38, you know, she told me that, you know, I was Native, that I was Mi'kmaq, but never taken in the community. And it was, you know, a deep, deep pain for her. You know, she was told that everyone was dead and that, you know, she was abandoned by her family and community. Nobody wanted her, and then everybody died. And that was like what she grew up believing. And so I grew up very dislocated. I grew up visibly different, really bullied for, you know, my skin color. I grew up in northern Ontario, so I grew up with a lot of Ojibwe and Algonquin, and so my mom's best friends, my aunties, were Ojibwe, Algonquin, and Mexican. So I grew up speaking Spanish and then the Algonquin Ojibwe culture, and it was very, very confusing. And then I came to be about 12 years old, and I said, this just doesn't make any sense to me. And my mom's like, your whole family's dead. You know, you don't need to know anything else. You know, just tell people you're Mexican and leave it at that. Like, try to avoid, you know, being bullied, right? Like, that's this oppressive issue that we face. And so I grew up very, very confused for many years. And then when I was about 16, I said, well, you know, F this. And I really pressured my mom to find out where we were from. I remember the day because she was like, fine, you really want to know? You're from Eel River Bar, we're from Eel River Bar, but the whole family's dead. Like, don't go there. There's no point. You're not going to find anything. And, you know, she has carries a lot of pain over this, right? And so I go, okay. So I'm, you know, 16, 17 years old, and my partner at the time, I go, well, you know, we're just gonna have to drive to New Brunswick and figure this out. Because I decided to take this face value. It didn't make sense to me. I'm a spitting image of my mom, and in my mind, in my teenage mind, I was like, if I'm a spitting image of my mom's got to be a spitting image of somebody else, right? And I really craved my culture, and I craved my community, and it wasn't replaceable. You know, the Ojibwe and Algonquin communities next door, they were very like, we claim you, like, you know, you can be with us. And I was like, it's not sitting right with me. I feel like I'm Mi'kmaq and I need to go find my community. And that's where I felt that calling and that pull. And so my partner and I drove out to New Brunswick, and at the point in my life, I was very like, in my head, I was like, I'm going to drive out to my community, because at this point I wrote probably 100 handwritten letters being like, you know, I think I'm from here. I have no idea what's going on. And I've made phone calls and sent faxes, and, you know, of course, zero response, right? And so I was like, well, being a very stubborn Indigenous girl, I was like, I better just drive out there and figure it out as I go. And in my mind, I said, okay, I'm going to drive out there and I'm going to spend years doing labor before someone talks to me. And that was my relationship. I was going to earn that conversation with my community. And it wasn't going to be given to me. It wasn't going to be handed to me because of my story or my bloodline, but I was going to earn it in that responsibility to my community. And that's like really what I did. And thankfully I didn't have to, in my mind, I was going to chop wood for years before somebody talked to me. I just figured that was like what would happen, and I was going to, earn my way into it. And I came home, and what ended up happening was that my mom's family, I come from a small community of about 600 people. My mom's family knew about my mom. And her grandmother, my great-grandmother, had asked the children to look for my mom. And nobody had found my mom. And so me returning home to community was a really big celebratory experience. And I ended up getting back in the car that night, the same night, drove another 22 hours back to Ontario. And I said, Mom, get in the effing car. Like, your family's not dead. You have 14 siblings. And your aunt, Margaret Lebilowa, who was the first female chief since the Indian Act and received the Order of Canada for language revitalization. So I was like, get in the car. And my mom, being, this person who experienced extreme colonialism and dislocation, can be very angry. And so she's like, I'm not getting in the car. And I had to wrestle my mom to the ground, get her into the car, and go, I'm taking you back to and just like the theatrics was wild, and took her home. I took her home, and she was in her 60s. She was not young, and from this process of colonization, she was colonized and dislocated and had deep abandonment and deep trauma and deep roots of pain. And it was through this reconnection to community. And at the end of the day, this is very personal, but community claims you. And if your community is not claiming you, you need to put the work in to get there. And if it doesn't, it's not something that can be forced or rushed. Now, my story, there was a lot of hope and joy, and my mom now lives, on reserve with her whole family and has this whole sense of community that she longed for and never had. And it's a beautiful, beautiful story, and we all live there. And I have a little brother who's has severe schizophrenia, and he's incompetent, and he's cared for by the whole community and the family. And I come from a single mom, and so for me, I was like, I need that support for me to drive forward in the work that I do and the specializations that I've done and everything I do. I can only do it if I have the support of my community. And that's what comes down to it. The questions I'm seeing is really about, if your community is not claiming you, or if you haven't done that work yet, you need to do that work. And that might take 50 years. It really actually might take 50 years. But if you truly feel that that's a calling and that you're Indigenous, that is your task to do. You don't get to claim it without that work. And
thank you so much for that story. It is a heartwarming, beautiful, beautiful story. And when you were telling it, your face was so full of joy, and a beautiful story. And you know what? Like, we have a duty and an obligation to wrap our arms around children who have been lost through the process. And that's why I say, when people used to come to the store, I would always say, welcome to the tribe, because we have an obligation to do that. The difference, I think, between you and others is that because I had a store for like 25, 30 years, it was a native store, and I'd have millions of people coming in all the time. And I would get at least one person a week who was disconnected from the community, or didn't know anything, or were trying to figure things out. Their heart was always in the right place. They weren't there for profit. They weren't there for fame. They weren't using the community. They were there seeking. And it seems like all the kids who are in that situation all come home. And when they come home, we have an obligation to greet them with open arms, because not everybody, the brutal hand of colonization. My mom went to residential school, and she was a disaster. Like, my mom has since passed on, but it was really hard. I mean, My mom did something, we would go to school and my mom, we all had long hair. She wouldn't let us cut it because she went to resident school. They cut her hair. She'd braid our hair on either side and do pigtails. She'd knit these giant couch and sweaters with giant eagles on it. And she'd be like, go to school and don't tell anybody you're Native. And I'm like, oh my God, we're walking stereotype. And me and my sisters would go to school and get beaten up every day. So, colonization is a true experience, and you're somebody who returned home. And that's very often what happens. I don't need to see a status card to know that you're Native. And I don't need to I hear the story and I know that you're my sister. There's a difference between that than when, I meet somebody and you can tell the motivation is so different. And that's where, we can figure that stuff out. We understand that stuff. So, that's a part of that heartfelt story. What a wonderful story. It's an amazing story. You're an amazing woman for telling us that. That must have been a real journey for you to go on.
Thank you. Well, it was, and it's so nice to, be home. I'm the big baby. All my aunts, now that, finally all my 14 aunts are like, you're the big baby. You just need a lot of love. And I'm like, yes, I do.
Cute. And they must totally be bolstered by your achievements and go, wow, look at you. So you come back as the shining star to the community to offer your services. And that's exactly what being Indigenous is all about. We're all about each other, and I want to bolster you up and make sure that you do well, because this is what we do. We extend our hand for each other. And that's a part of that web, the web that we weave together. So thank you for that. That was a beautiful story, man. You were lighting up like crazy when you were telling that. You were just beaming. It was like, what a great adventure. You should write a book about it.
Yeah. And she's a light in our lives, I'll tell you, every day. There is something that was said here, and I want to, Saber, I want you to kind of look at this. And I know we're running out of time. Are you guys okay with going for a couple more minutes?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So Scott had mentioned that there's a current NFB job posting for a director of Indigenous Relations. And in the job, they said, they asked if you have a tangible and demonstrated connection with your Indigenous community. So what would that mean for you? What kind of tangible and demonstrated connection to the community?
Well, one of the things we see with this posting that's fascinating is that they no longer want to have egg on their face. So there's an incentive for their brand to protect itself from the kind of assault that they received by not vetting and carefully having a policy in place in terms of how they were going to deal with people. The person they're going to hire now, this is an amazing thing, is that you push back. For the first time probably ever, the NFB now is going to hire somebody who's visibly Native. And I love that. If I go to the NFB and I see a Native person there, because those are the people in our community that have had the most difficulty. And, for like me, I'm half. So people don't know what I am. My mom's Haida, we're matriarchal, matrilineal. So everything goes down through. I get my clan, my lineage, and everything through my mom. So I'm considered in my community to be like fully integrated into the community and fully Native, because my mother taught me all of this stuff, even though she was residential school, it was like very difficult because I learned some and I didn't learn some, but still in that, it was the NFB. So I think you're going to see the television industry really taking note of their partnerships, their allegiances, and their alliances. And I believe that they got the memo. And I think it's about time.
Yeah. How about you, Saber?
I echo everything Tamara said, but that, the key word there is tangible, right? And so they want to know, they want something tangible. And I think the question is, what does tangible mean in the context of a job application? And to me, it really means like having letters or sworn statements from other community members, from chief and council, from the family that's involved in community, and that's really what tangible to me means in that context.
Mhm. Absolutely. Someone had asked, how do you think our artists can help? I mean,
Is that
yeah.
Craig?
Hey,
Craig asked that. Craig, I added you on
Craig.
Facebook the other day. So
Oh, Craig Commanda. Hey, Craig. Also from Kitagun TV.
Artists,
How?
they can do so much to advance this narrative because they're artists. They're the commentators of our culture. They capture our stories. They capture moments in time. I'm wearing a t-shirt by an artist, Not Today Colonizer. And it's by an artist I support. I always try to wear like Native t-shirts and Native stuff because I want to support Indigenous business. But I think artists can do a lot. Capture it in a poem, capture it in a song, capture it in a painting, capture it in a film, bring this narrative. They're the ones who envision the future. And so our artists really are our visionaries in terms of how they're going to visualize the future for our Indigenous people. So yeah, artists are, I mean, in my culture, they're very well respected. They're top of the bar. If you're an artist, you're way up there.
yeah, and I think that's it. Like, artists are in such a unique position that they're not tethered to anything. Like, I'm a researcher, so I try to be subjective, and I try to check my bias and ensure that I am amplifying voices, and artists are that voice. So artists are just in such a unique position that they can take a strong position and they can echo that, and they can make that clear through all the artistic and cultural expressions, like Tamara said. And I think that's the strength that artists should really draw on, and they need to be true to their spirit and true to the voice that needs to be echoed, and take that positionality.
There's been so many paintings. Oh, sorry, Albert.
Yeah. Just I think artists should collaborate with other artists, and with other Indigenous artists, that is, on things that promote the identity and culture of their nation, or the Indigenous ways of knowing. And as a matter of fact, Craig and I just collaborated on a project, and I still haven't seen the finished project there, Craig. I hope you send me something about it. Big lunch.
Thanks, Albert. Tamara?
I just want to say one thing about, if you look at the artists who uplifted Black Lives Matter, it was their iconography that defined a part of the moment for us. Images of George Floyd, images of Black Lives Matter, images of posters and images. And that was flooding our social media. It was flooding everything we do. And I think artists, I feel a lot of artists have responsibilities. They have, they carry that weight. So if we look at Black Lives Matter, it inspired the narrative, and it really kept everything visible for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to ask each of you if you can give me a last comment, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to end our discussion. We've got a little over time, but that's great. The best discussions do. So Tamara, I'm going to start with you.
I want to thank you for including me in this discussion. It's a real honor to be talking to you, and it's an honor to be a part of this discussion. I can, one of the things I can do is I can help advance the discussion and advance things, and that's what I'm here to do. Is I'm here to do service work for my community, and whatever that means, So I recognize all of the faces here and the voices here also doing service work and participating in the community with their heart. And I really appreciate that. And I'm sorry if I offended anybody. I have very strong beliefs around this because I've done a tremendous amount of research and spoken to a lot of people. And I'm very passionate about what I do. It's a thing. And but I want to also thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for participating, and everybody who have questions and comments. Thank you for their time and their energy in this conversation.
Thanks, Tamara. How about you, Saber?
Just big thanks to Tamara, big thanks to Albert, and of course Monique. This has been a really great conversation and needs to be continued and built upon. And another big thanks to everyone that came and joined. I can't believe we've had like 50 or 60 questions and comments to the chat. And that just really strengthens me and everything I do and wake up in the morning. And it's nice to know that you're not alone. And I just wanted to thank everyone for joining, and we'll continue on with our work.
And Albert, I'm going to ask you for a final comment, and then if you could close us out, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so do you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, just wanted to say, I think it was about 10 years ago, and I was alone at my cabin. I've got a cabin on Bitobi Lake at Kittikon, and it was about this time of the year. Anyways, I was in the cabin. It was in the morning, and I went to the sliding door, and I saw that there was a mosquito bouncing on the glass of the sliding door, and the mosquito was full of blood, and I knew that it was my blood because I was the only one in there. So I chuckled to myself and I said, "There's a full-blooded Algonquin mosquito," and that mosquito has my blood, and it's got places to go and things to do with that blood. So I opened the sliding door and I shooed the mosquito out into the yard, and I closed the sliding door because they serve a purpose. Mosquitoes serve a purpose. They're part of the cycle of life, and they're an important part of it. The mosquitoes and black flies and deer flies and stuff like that, and they serve a great purpose. Anyway, the thing is this, though, that some people don't even have that one drop of blood in them, but they're still identifying. And that's a fact. Nobody can argue that. Some people have just one drop of blood, let's say, and then they want to be our voice. And they don't care if they drown out our voice. They don't care if our voice falls silent forever, as long as their voice is heard, because they believe they have a right because they have that one drop. And to me, that's not right. And if I offended anybody for saying that, then I'm okay with it. Because if we have to offend somebody so our voices will be heard, then let's offend some people. Because I for one, anyways, do not regret my stand against people who steal grants from us, who steal jobs from us, who steal from the inmates by taking over programs in the prison system, and they steal and steal and steal, and it's just so upsetting to me as a human rights activist, because our human rights are being abused in the most racist of ways by these people who do that. So with that, I want to say to the good spirits in Manado, how grateful we are for everything that went well tonight. We're grateful for everything that was shared, everything that was learned. We're especially grateful for the good words of solidarity, and we're even greater still for the dedication and commitment that Indigenous people have, and the pride of having that blood, that special blood. We are the special ones, because nobody ever came to this continent that didn't wish it was them that had been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. We're the lucky ones. So big watch, and we ask that you watch over us until we rest tonight. We ask that whenever we go to that place where we will sleep, that we fill that place with love, health, and joy. Miigwech, I hope to see you soon.
Miigwech, Albert. And I'd like to thank everybody. Tamara, it's been a real honor to see you, to have you here. Saber, way to go. Such a great job. Albert, I just love working with you. Yeah, I can't tell you, you changed my life when we
Good,
started
mhm.
working together. And if
Mhm.
you guys, after this, our next lecture will be on June 15th, and it's called Misogyny, Marriage, and the Indian Act. And it's in the chat, and same bat time, same bat channel. And I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing some of you guys there. And so I'd just like to thanks to everyone who came out tonight, and for all the questions. I'm sorry, I know I couldn't get to everybody. I tried to, get to them as I could, but I'm so glad you were here, and let's keep this conversation going, because it'll be the way that that'll changes will be made. So Kachimi Gwich to everyone. Thanks.
Good night. Bye.
Everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Right.
Thanks.